Melissa, we're going to bring people in from the audience so they have a chance to enter the conversation as well.
This is the best panel discussion I've been to in years. What wonderful comments.
You have as much time as you want.
I didn't say you were any good. I was talking about I thought a better title for your book, given what you just said, might have been "Don't Stand by Me." So, all right. What I wanted to comment on was Rick's interchange with Melissa, which seemed to me really very informative. And I wanted to ask both of you about whether, as I understand this interchange, one account of it is you're both very anxious to find ways to give black women more power to make certain kinds of choices. And both of these seem to be option value kind of power. That both of you seem to see that you're stuck if you need certain kinds of relationships for finance. You need to understand your relationship as monogamous and intimate and financially connected in order to have it be valuable. And Rick's suggestion is, well, if you open up the market, you'll have more power, and Melissa's suggestion seems to be there's other better ways to get more power, which is to destigmatize other kinds of options than linking sexual monogamy with personal fulfillment and friendship and help in childbearing. And there's a sense in which those seem very consistent with each other. That is, destigmatizing other versions of intimacy and destigmatizing other options for marriage and saying we also need social safety nets as a way of creating more power all seem to go hand in hand. But the sense in which I think you're disagreeing is, Melissa says, no, no, no. Destigmatizing out marriage is reinforcing the urgency, and it doesn't even need to be marriage, the urgency of long-term monogamous relationship is the only solution to problems, and that seems to be your conflict, is destigmatizing multiple options.
Berkeley, Stanford, the conflict is much bigger than that. Much bigger than that.
But this year. But I would just say, no, I think that's a great, the best question I've heard in years. But no, I mean, I think that is the case. And I would say that our society's refusal to destigmatize interracial marriage involving black women, right, to grant black women the freedom to do the same things that everyone else has the freedom to do, does amount to holding black women hostage. That amounts to holding black women hostage, and I think black women deserve better than that.
I think the whole emphasis on marriage holds women hostage. So we agree women are hostages.
Right. Well, let me...
Hi. Okay. So my question is, stems from the parallel that came to my mind when I was listening to you talk, which is the discussion in the Jewish community about out-marriage or intermarriage. And it works very differently in the Jewish community. Admittedly, a lot of things don't work. There isn't a parallel, and there certainly isn't such a high incarceration rate of Jewish men. But there is a higher rate of Jewish men marrying out of the Jewish community than Jewish women. The difference that I see is that within the Jewish community, I would say the vast majority of people who consider themselves highly identified as Jewish would consider marrying out, intermarriage, as a very sort of bad thing for one's Jewish identity, that this is a real threat to one's Jewish identity. And I'm curious that there's been relatively little discussion about the threat to one's identity as African American or black from threatening, I mean, Professor Buchanan brought it up a little bit, but this is something that, and I wonder to what extent does this have to do with the discussion on racism and race in America versus the discussion on religion. It's okay to have a religious identity, but racial identities, I think, are more problematic. And I want to sort of ask the question about what does this book say about African American identity and race more broadly? So
this is a great, again, I want to thank the panelists. These are great questions that I was not able to address in my brief comments. And the issue of identity is dealt with a lot in the book. And one of the places it comes through is that a lot of black women said they were worried about having children who were so light-skinned that they might not identify as black, right? And they're worried about the children losing their black identity and losing black culture. And so that's a real fear. But I also think it's a fear that, again, once we open up a discussion and can talk about it, it's not quite as pernicious or potent as it may seem. As a parent of 3 boys who are growing up in California, Northern California, as a child of parents who grew up in Georgia and Alabama, and then raised us in Cleveland, my children's identity will be as different from mine, no matter what I do, as mine was from my parents. And to have children who marry someone from another group, to have children who don't identify as black, is another way in which children's identities change in ways their parents cannot control. And one of the major challenges for parents is to realize, in this and many other ways, that you can't control who your children will want to be. And that's actually true irrespective of who they marry, but it's accentuated or especially salient around this question of intermarriage. So I think that's kind of a parenting challenge.
Also, though,
Yeah.
the book does have a lot about the same kind of pressures that you feel in the community. There is a lot of pressure in the black community that you are a traitor, particularly, I think, for women. Black women feel that you are a traitor if you marry out. So there was a lot of people in the book expressed the fear that their own families, the black woman, that their black families would not approve of having a white partner.
Can I answer this a little bit differently? So I'm not sure if it was in the excerpt that you read for today's presentation, but there is a discussion in the book about black women who marry out and find this sort of liberatory space where they actually feel freer to be blacker. So they go natural, right? And their partners actually have no conception of good hair and bad hair and certain things that might constrain, right, for lack of a better way of explaining this, constrain the performance of blackness when you have a black partner. And I found this really curious and intriguing. And I was actually shopping at Macy's and had just finished reading this section of the book, and a black woman came in with threads, and she was there with her white partner. And I said, wow, there's actually a good example of this. But the reason that it intrigued me was it seemed to me like there was an underdeveloped explanation of sort of white norms and what they could mean if you interpret them differently. So going natural so that you can walk in the rain, or that someone doesn't have to smell your hair burning from like flat irons and things of that nature actually suggests like kind of a reinstantiation of white norms, right? I'm uncomfortable with the cultural practices that African American women engage in order to, control their aesthetic appearance. So I want you to do this. I want you to change. And what consequences does that have for these professional women in a professional space? Because we do have literature suggesting that employers actually react more negatively to women who are natural, right? What consequences does it have for black women in the black marriage market, again, when they go back in, if there are all these sanctions associated with being natural? So what I wanted to see was kind of a more nuanced discussion of that. And I also noticed that these women were straightening and wearing weaves and doing all these kind of Eurocentric things when they attracted their white partner. But then in a moment of love, they shed everything, right? And so what do they do if that relationship fails? So that's kind of a different take on the social construction of race issue that I wanted to bring up before.
That goes, though, and that goes to the issue, I think, of the corrosive effect on black women in general, because even if that relationship fails, if you come out of it with a sense of, I'm really okay without straightening my hair, maybe you're better off, maybe you have been liberated in some way by this interracial relationship. I mean, I don't know, I thought that was really interesting too, and I started noticing the same thing you did, like everywhere you looked, but I don't know, to me it seemed liberating to me to read it.
Yeah, one just say too, and thank you. That's actually one of my favorite parts of the book, actually. So thank you for mentioning that. And I guess the point there is that I do throughout the book. I mean, it actually does explore the ways in which many of the things that we might regard as cultural norms with African American men and women are in fact ways of policing black women and constraining and controlling black women. And it's not that. Black women are free to enact their culture, right? The culture is actually enforced in ways that are sometimes really pernicious. Just 2 facts, right? We do know that black men have a strong preference for lighter-skinned black women. This means that darker-skinned black women are both less likely to marry, controlling for all other factors, and they're also more likely to marry lower-earning men. And so one might wonder whether darker-skinned black women in particular would fare better in a broader market in which the men are not as beholden to the norms that black men enforce against black women in their daily lives.